Just like race, ethnicity also has its own set of complexities and things that make it often difficult to identify or difficult to even talk about. For one, ethnicity can be physically and psychologically invisible. Let's start with the physical part. It can be physically invisible. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take myself for an example. Um, as most of you know, I am a white man. My race, I just made a statement about my race right there. I am Caucasian. I am non-Hispanic, white. That is my race. But what is my ethnicity? Can you guess my ethnicity? Many people, from when we've just from the past and when I've taught this class face to face, many people cannot guess my ethnicity. I am British and Scottish, mostly a few other things, but mostly British and Scottish. But those um, ethnicities there, that statement about where in the world my family comes from, that's not physically viewable. It's physically invisible. My ethnicity is not known just by looking at me. For very, very few people, is it known just by looking at them. Um, so ethnicity can be physically invisible. It can also be psychologically invisible. We don't necessarily know what cultural practices someone has or what religious beliefs, what part of the world their family comes from. That might be a result of the psychological invisibility within that person. Let's talk about the term of selective forgetting. This means someone can forget or dismiss one's connection to one or more of their ethnicities. Let me give you an example. Selective forgetting is an example of psychological invisibility of ethnicity. Let me give you an example of selective forgetting. Suppose that my father is German, and he is a deadbeat, hardly ever home. When he is at home, he's yelling and screaming at my mom, yelling and screaming at me. Drinks too much, just not a very good guy. I haven't had a very good relationship with him, my German father. Suppose I have a much better relationship with my, um, let's say, French Canadian mother. She's with me a lot more. She's much more emotionally supportive. I don't feel threatened or um, belittled by her. And if my dad's hardly ever home, and when he is home, he's doing things that I don't like, I'm probably not going to be too proud of my German ancestry or German ethnicity. I'm probably going to be much more likely to identify with my mother's French Canadian ancestry. Similarly, we might not know much about a certain part of our ethnicity. We might have a certain great grandparent who came from, I don't know, to choose any part of the world, came from Russia. But if we were never that close to them, our parents weren't that close to them, we don't know much about them, we're probably going to identify with other elements of our ethnicity. So we might selectively forget. We might kind of choose to forget about a certain part of our ethnicity. That's that psychological invisibility. When we talk about hidden ethnicity, this is where one's culture is deemed normal or mainstream, and therefore we don't pay too much attention to it. Let me give you an example of this. Suppose that you have a mostly African American high school. So when you have a mostly African American high school, we assume that um, the mainstream ethnicity there is going to be Black American. Now, Black is a race, but Black American is going to be a certain ethnicity. Well, within that population of mostly Black high school students, you might have some students who are Haitian. They might have family members who speak French and are Roman Catholic. That is going to conflict with a majority of a majority of the rest of the student body, where they're probably going to be Black American, probably most likely to be Protestant, either Baptist or Methodist. But even though someone is of the same race, black, they might have a completely different ethnicity. But just because they're black, like most other people, that ethnicity is hidden. You might have somebody who's Jamaican, the kind of foods their family eats, some of the beliefs and attitudes on certain, political topics or cultural topics might be a little bit different. So that's what we mean when we say hidden ethnicity. Um, we know someone's race, but if that race is like everybody else in a certain context or a certain setting, there might be elements of their ethnicity that are different than the rest and therefore a little bit hidden. Um, Ethnicity is also complex because, as you see, it can be involuntary. Often, when we're choosing an ethnicity, we're kind of filling out a government form. And maybe the category we really want to identify with is not there. We might just be choosing something like Indian or Hispanic. So when we say it's involuntary, it means we don't necessarily have a choice. Or if we do have a choice, we're choosing from the choices that other people or institutions are giving us. Um, and then again, or to make one more point, ethnicity can be superficial. If something's superficial, that means it exists on the surface, but one's commitment to it really isn't that deep. I say that to introduce the concept of what we call symbolic ethnicity from sociologist Herbert Gans. You see the definition there. It has some stuffy language. I'll read it, then I'll explain it. Symbolic ethnicity refers to the nostalgic allegiance to or pride for a cultural tradition that can be experienced at will, but not necessarily on a day-to-day basis. Let me give you an example of this. I grew up in the Chicago area. The city of Chicago, there's a large Irish American population there. So as a result, St. Patrick's Day is celebrated, pretty widely. Many people who are not Irish at all, or are just a little bit Irish, or if it's not something they really identify that much with, many individuals, they're Irish on St. Patrick's Day. They may be only Irish on St. Patrick's Day because they want to go to the party, they want to have a drink, do the dances, eat the food, all the stuff that goes on at these St. Patrick's Day parades. People wear shirts that say like "Kiss me, I'm Irish," or they wear all green to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And this is something that can be experienced at will. They can partake in it to have fun. But is their Irish ethnicity really important on a day-to-day basis? Probably not. You have. I heard a police officer say one day, I he told me one day, I used to have kind of like a 9 to 5 office job, but now I'm a police officer. I guess it's in the Irish blood. I'm an adrenaline junkie. He said because he was Irish, he claimed to be, an adrenaline junkie, and therefore he wanted to work as a police officer and not as, an office worker. And he claimed that because he was Irish. Now, listen, are Irish people more attracted to exciting work or maybe dangerous work than other people? I don't know, but again, that's superficial or symbolic ethnicity. He's using his ethnicity to make a symbolic statement about himself and his choice of work. So when we talk about symbolic ethnicity, we're talking about people who might claim affiliation to or pride for a certain ethnicity, but only on a here and there basis. It's not really a big part of their day-to-day lives. They don't speak the Irish dialect or certain dialect of English that Irish people speak. They they don't really have many close ties to Ireland, but they might claim this just to partake in a certain fun experience. Let's clarify some more terms. Prejudice is a preconceived opinion or attitude about an entire group of people, often, but not necessarily on the basis of racial or ethnic minority group. Prejudice is just a negative attitude. Everyone is prejudiced towards some group. We might have a negative attitude or be prejudiced toward people who double park. We might have a negative attitude or be prejudiced toward these people at the intersections who they take the window wiper from the gas station and then try to wipe down your windows and expect money for it. Everyone is prejudiced toward a certain group of people. Hopefully, we're not prejudiced simply because of one's racial or ethnic background, but indeed, some people are. Prejudice is, just an attitude. When we are prejudiced toward ethnic or racial minority groups, that often gives way to stereotypes. Stereotypes are oversimplified generalizations about entire groups of people. We can all think of stereotypes of certain races and ethnic groups. Racism. Racism is defined as a belief that one race is supreme and all others are inferior. Racism can derive from racial prejudice. Now, that's one definition of racism. That's like an individual definition of racism. An individual can believe that one race is supreme and better than all others. We also have institutional racism, which I'm going to get to shortly. Um, Prejudice, racism, these are beliefs, these are attitudes. When we get to discrimination, I always say that's where the rubber meets the road, because discrimination is where you have unequal treatment, the denial of rights and opportunities to people based on their membership in a group, or people based on their race or ethnicity. One example of discrimination is profiling, suspecting someone of wrongdoing on the basis of their race or ethnicity. Another form of discrimination is scapegoating. This is where we blame groups of people for problems or adverse conditions that these groups are not responsible. These people are not responsible for. Blaming Hispanic immigrants for like taking jobs. That's a common example of scapegoating. Blaming Black people for crime rates in a particular city. That's an example of scapegoating. Displacement. This is where we transfer hostile or negative ideas or emotions from their true origin to another group of people. Like, I'm upset that I lost my job, so I blame somebody else. Displacement often goes hand in hand with scapegoating. Um, Discrimination is not always intentional, and it's not always based on prejudice or racism. You're going to see some articles and videos about that. Um, Discrimination is often carried out institutionally and in race neutral terms. Again, you'll see this more vividly in outside of this lecture, but discrimination and racism can take place individually. You can have somebody who discriminates against somebody because they don't like that person's race or ethnicity. You can have somebody who has racist attitude, yes, but oftentimes racism and discrimination are carried out institutionally, meaning you know there's not necessarily racist people involved, but you have racist practices, discriminatory policies. So you'll see examples of that, but racism and discrimination can both take place institutionally, kind of above and beyond what individual people do.